Здравствуйте, коллеги. Здравствуйте. Приветствуем еще раз Ольгу Мироновну.
Good afternoon, dear colleagues. Welcome once again, and with your permission, let us start our third panel, which is called The Modern Global Centers of Power and Their Projects. I understand that we have about 9 to 10 keynote presentations, and all in all, we have 75 minutes. So we have 5 minutes each. Let's be brief and laconic, but let us be bright. We are doomed to be bright and to be brief, so we'll speak in formulas. Only thing I may request, let's somehow connect what has already been discussed with what you are going to deliver. Probably you will provide some feedback to what's been outlined. Any volunteers to start? If not, then Dmitry, Chuburkov, most welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, please be quiet. We have started. My name is Dmitry Chuburkov from the city of Donetsk, Donetsk People's Republic Union TV channel. Recently, I've noticed that my life of a TV anchor is filled with Steinmeier. This is a real tendency, and still there are a lot of shootouts in Donbass, and there is a lot of shooting there, despite all kinds of armistice and truce. The harvest armistice and the holidays armistice, parapats and parabellum. We in Donbass, we want peace very much. We know what to compare what we have now with anything else. This is for the sixth time that we are at war. After the Minsk Agreements number 2, we actually were told not to succinct to provocations and not to start shooting. And in contrast to libertarian Ukrainian authorities, we are used to obey to the orders and fulfill the instructions. There are things which actually are highlighted with dash lines, and there are things which are quite obvious. And it is quite easy to identify the global centers of force. One of these centers, that's Russia. The recent developments, developments in Syria confirm that. It becomes even more obvious for us living in Donbass. We understand that we're not part of that center of power. Formally or technically, we are not here in Russia, but we are dependent on the decisions which are taken in Russia to a different extent. And certainly, asking a question which I'm going to voice now, I cannot distantiate myself from the reality of the Republic. The question is as follows. To what extent one of the centers of power, such as Russia, may afford such actually fountaining entity as modern Ukraine, which actually is defined not by Lobanovsky and other outstanding scientists, but rather Bandera and Azov punitive forces. I started with Steinmeier not by accident. There is a strive to retain the integrity of Ukraine, which actually won't be coupled with their common sense and neutrality. So this approach did not succeed, actually. The ouster of authority in Ukraine took place more than 6 months ago. And its restructuring, its embodiment in the parliament, the fact that the incumbent president, which gained 73% votes, he said he is aiming at peace, and the Steinmeier formula was finally signed, but still it is a failure. And all of a sudden, some ruffians come to the front line with the slogan that Ukraine is above everything, and that's it. On top of this pyramid, we see a classical pull me, push you. So the classic approach, which was generated in one of the towers of Kremlin, actually this approach probably was quite justified, but it is a failure. Ukraine is not with Russia. Ukraine is against Russia. This is the reality of today. And we have to admit something. We have to admit that the radicals which promote the most extreme ideas are not numerous, but they're very toxic. They are toxic that actually this is too much. And every day that Russia fails to recognize the People's Republic of Lugansk and Donetsk, and actually every day of existence of Ukraine, which is dominated by Russophobic authorities, adds to the mush and bog of turmoil. Thank you so much. Nikolai, I think that we'll pick up from that.
Значит, я тоже представляю Донецк, руководитель Донецкого отделения научно-образовательного центра имени Зиновьева при факультете глобальных процессов, значит, МГУ. Центр и отделение, значит, наше отделение создано при поддержке очень активной Ольги Мироновны Зиновьевой, за что ей большое спасибо, и уже много лет там работаем. Я хотел бы продолжить тему, которую начал Дмитрий Владимирович Чубурков. Вот, голос его, кстати, звучит каждый день по Донецкой Народной Республике по каналу. Он ведет там общую, так сказать, информацию и дает свои темы. Тема моего выступления – глобализация как война нового типа. Что такое, прежде всего, война? Термин это он уже избит. Я хотел бы толкование дать с точки зрения зиновьевского понимания, видения глобализации как войны нового типа. Война – это силовое решение, значит, целеполагания при наличии конфликта интересов. Форм этих войны великое множество. И любая война, как и мир, она определяется биосоциальными законами. Повторяю, биосоциальными законами. Очень часто мы говорим о социальных законах и забываем, что есть в основе, так сказать, это прежде всего корневами, это биологические законы. Из множества законов я хочу остановиться на 3 из них. Это закон социальной эволюции, закон эгоистического расчета, о котором писал очень много Александр Александрович Зиновьев, показывал, доказывал эти законы, и раскрывал их картину, их суть, их специфику. И 3 – это закон доминирования. Закон доминирования, он имеет как бы аспект и биологический, и социальный. Ну, первый закон, о котором я упомянул, это закон социальной эволюции, когда общество пробивается на сегодняшний так называемый через действие транснациональных корпораций. Кстати сказать, вот и на первой, и на второй панели упоминались об этом влиянии транснациональных корпораций, их более 550 в мире, на политику, на интересы тех или иных отдельных стран или тех или иных регионов. И это влияние очень часто, может быть, и незаметное, но оно мощное, постоянное давление на, значит, те или иные общества, которые возникают, рождаются, увядают, растут и так далее. Второй закон – это закон экзистенциального расчета, значит, или как его закон эгоистический расчет, о котором очень много тоже писал Александр Александрович. Каждый объект, социальный объект, малый, большой, сложный, простой, он действует прежде всего в своих интересах. Но вы знаете, народная пословица «своя рубашка ближе к телу». И вот конфликт интересов, то есть свой интерес с интересами соседа, дальнего, ближнего и так далее, это проблем сегодняшнего дня. Опять-таки хочу отослать участвующие здесь зрители, слушатели и нас к тем вот вопросам, которые обсуждали их на первых 2 панелях. Ведь, по сути дела, все упирается в интересы. Суть в чем? Которых мы не понимаем, не знаем их интересов. Чего ради для? Скажем, чего ради для бьется Европа? На словах может одно, а на деле другое. Чего ради бьется Соединенные Штаты Америки, Запад против Востока, Россия, ну и скажем, вот наша кровоточащаяся рана – это Донецкая Народная Республика, Луганская Народная Республика. В целом, значит, воюющий Донбасс. Это очень серьезная проблема. И сейчас вот политические силы, как говорят, играют в долгую. А кто расплачивается за эти игры? Вот если брать только 3 слоя, низший слой населения, средний слой и верхний слой, у нас что получается? Вот здесь господин Кеза говорил об этом, что у нас, не только он и другие говорили, что у нас средний слой вымывается. А кто остается? Поляризация идет сумасшедшая. Естественно, конфликт интересов напрягается, растет напряженность. И третий закон, значит, доминирования. Закон доминирования, то есть все время показывать везде и всюду, он очень часто идет на эмоциональном уровне, инстинктно-гормональном доминировании, начиная в семье, начиная в районе, начиная в городе, с любой социальной клеточки, которая есть, закон доминирования. И он что рождает? Он, с одной стороны, рождает, так сказать, управляемый хаос. Управляемый хаос – это закон доминирования, с одной стороны, а с другой стороны закладывает мину, которая может в любой момент взорваться. Вот. И почему война, значит, глобализация, как война нового типа, гибридная война, она, кстати, есть у нас, об этом Дмитрий Владимирович сказал, вот в Донбассе мы сами ощущаем на своей коже каждый день. Она носит характер и горячее, то есть идет постоянное убийство, стрельба с обеих сторон. И холодная война, это информационная, прежде всего, так называемая мягкая сила. И теплая война, то есть холодная и горячая, они перемежаются друг с другом. И вот эти проблемы.
And the main objective is that the people who are dealing with that is to have an advanced knowledge, advanced understanding of what is going on. The problem of a global world. Why? Actually, because when we understand these phenomena, if we can think several steps in advance, then we can positively influence the problem of war and peace.
Anastasia Mikhailovna, will you pick up with this? Yes. Yes, I will speak on world order and what was the previous speaker said. Ukraine and its people brought us to the stage that Kiev itself, as a governing system, will not manage. If we don't want this country to collapse, and things are going worse and worse, I believe, that's my point of view, my thoughts about that, who is capable of statehood? DNR, Donetsk Republic, and LNR, Lugansk Republic. They managed to create things, not to be in a fighting, not to try to accuse others. But if one of the conflicting parties cannot tackle the tasks that are granted to the state, the other should hand it to the other. Let the Lugansk Republic and Donetsk Republic resolve these issues, tackle these issues of statehood. Let them do this, take this on their shoulders, and we will help them. And whom do you recommend this? Whom do you address this recommendation? I think that we need to promote this idea, all of us, and the thoughts that takes over the masses becomes material, becomes tangible. Thank you. Vladimir Mikhailovich, will you pick up with this? Well, just if you permit. Well, colleagues, I invite all of you, just remember the questions that you have, and we'll go around the table first, and then we will launch a discussion. Khadukin Vladimir, member of the Street of Truth Club. I would like to think about the force of global projects in the context of interaction. What can be fruitful mechanisms of interaction of whom and whom, of centers of power and global projects? Well, the way I see it, I think that we are in some transient points. We we are witnessing the multipolar project now that was once launched by the United States. So I experience it as a failure now. It looks like Russia is doomed virtually on becoming a certain center of power. We see this, our success in Syria. We also see that some countries of Africa and Venezuela invite us to the bases, and there are also decisions to set up expeditional regiments of the Russian Federation. So virtually there is a possibility that in spite of its own will, Russia may step into the role of a leader or an arbiter of the world order. Well, I think that the situation with a leader who rules everything is quite obvious on the one hand, and virtually there are no ways out, no other solutions. We may remember a well-known phenomenon in sociology, a tragedy of communities when there are a certain number of independent entities or that use a common resource. And in our case, that's the Earth, the planet. But each of these individuals begin to pull blanket to their side, because each of them wants something better for themselves. This leads us to a very serious depletion of that resource. That's what we see on our planet. For instance, there's demography on the rise in certain regions, and pollution is on the rise in some other regions. As a rule, there is some way out. There should be one owner or one holder of all these resources, and the one who will work things out. I would like to remind you Eleanor Rostrom's work, who is actually the only woman Nobel Prize winner on economy. She suggested the mechanism of a single leader who rules everything, who governs everything. She said that common pastures, irrigation systems, etc., sometimes mean that during hundreds of centuries, the entities that used all that, even without leader, can use that in a rational way. So that happens. So a solution that can be offered is the following. Centers of power should cooperate, not pull the blanket to their own side. But each of them should work on the promotion of the methods that Ostrom mentioned. They need to work in the direction of cooperation of the centers of power. So the theorem of existence was proven. So such systems have existed. And at least one example is given. For instance, in Sri Lanka, the irrigation system that was in a dilapidating state, a certain intellectual center or think tank stepped into the fore. Some specialists were trained, so the whole system was brought into a good, healthy state. As a result of that, the previously belligerent groups stopped fighting, but began to support each other in spite of their ethnic differences or denominational differences. They began to work together. So we, as an intellectual center, should draw our attention to such an approach, because I believe that this can work out in the global world order. If we manage to, this will help us to ensure the true multipolarity, not just replacement of one leader with another. We need to think, for instance, about the way to learn how to set up a self-regulating system, for instance, in the groupings that exist in Russia. And with this, Russia will be able to spread this role model, this practical experience to other, and share it with others. Alexey Borisovich. In 1990-91, I belonged to the separatist fraction. We set up the South Russian Republic in the triangle between Volgograd to Zhdanov in the south, with the whole Donetsk being part of that would be republic, and Astrakhan. And also there's people in Moscow realized that there were two governments ruling in the same way, and hate each other. It became clear that we do not need anything of this sort. I was in big power there, and I was a Moscow representative there with good connections to different ministries. So at one of our meetings in Rostov, I wanted to make it pleasant to my master, say, well, we'll separate from them and we'll flood Moscow. And one of Rostov entrepreneur representatives, and we had just a very serious team. So one man looked at me and said, but first, we will put a fence around it. I said, why? Why do you need a fence around Moscow before you want to flood it? So not a single Muscovite to survive. He said, because if a single Muscovite survives, then they will multiply and spread. So it happens, so it means that a single Muscovite is a big power. When I speak about Muscovites, I want to explain and refer to my father, a former editor chief of the Komsomolska Pravda and the last foreign minister of the SSR. From his, after a trip as a journalist to Siberia, he brought a folk. I brought a folk song with the words like that. I peed in one boot and in the other, and now with all the spoiled and wet boots, what will I wear? So Muscovites are those who do this. So the first wetted boot is the revolution of February 1917. because that was a chance to introduce the election system in the army and freedom for all political prisoners of those times, who spoke about the collapse of the monarchy, and that February revolution of 1917 was this first spoiled or wetted boot, and the second wetted boot was coup d'etat in 1991. There were chances to change many things in ideology, in agriculture, in industry. Everything that could be done was not done, and those who brought the system into deterioration were those who followed approximately the same thoughts as those who failed in February 1917. They were those who were imbued with liberalized ideas. So I understand that these are not all Muscovites are like this. It was difficult to explain this to that man from Rostov. But in his understanding, there are those who are disconnected from reality. So by Muscovites, I call those who live well, and they believe, nevertheless, that their life and the life of the whole country is in a devastating state. They need to be saved. Somebody should do something about this. And just to make it clear, the situation with Maria Butina, you may be aware of that. A Muscovite will differ from a non-Muscovite in the following. That was another failed attempt to introduce someone. Non-Muscovites will say, we do not know how the United States are organized, and a woman was imprisoned for 18 months and touched there, and we know how things are done. So Muscovite is a person who is outside, who is not linked with the practical experience. And actually, those who come from Ukraine and are present here may agree that many good and normal people went to Maidan just because they believed that signing of a certain paper will turn their life into a paradise on the earth. So I would call a Muscovite a center of power, capable of many changes, of launching many powerful events. So I'm interested in them more than in any other centers of power and globalization. I think that something is to be done with people whom I call Muscovites, or people with Muscovite mentality. Do you want to launch a comment, or just to pick up with this? Oleg, Nazarov. I think that what I want to contribute goes in line with what you said. I absolutely disagree with what you said about Muscovites. Although when I settled in a village 6 years ago, I was called, well, actually I live in the Ukraine that was called that way back in the times of Ivan the Great. So I live on the banks of the Oka River. That was the true Ukraine. Ukraine in Russian means that the one that exists at the edge of the state. So the local people called me a Muscovite. So I had to work on the land, to plant potatoes, to build a house with my own hands. And so they say, okay, good man, good guy. Now I am the elder, so to say, the one who is in charge of the life of the village. It took me 6 years to take that respected position in the village. So Russians, we're called like that now, and we're here to speak about modern centers of power and their global concepts. I believe that what we have is the center of power, but it's not a global project or global concept. I'm not sure about that. Will our civilization become a global concept? That's a big question. Leaning on what we had in our previous discussion, I think that we need to use the notion of quasi-multipolarity, because they're real centers of power, and these are the poles of civilization. It is the global concepts. I apologize for just that was a slip of the tongue. So global concepts are actually the poles of the world. So one of the global concepts is the West, a monolith. You may speak about independent Europe or independent Japan that we will tear off the United States, etc. Alexander Zinoviev, in his book The West, Westernism, said, "Don't try to knock the wall down with your head. There is a general phenomenon on Westernism." So it may be Westernism proper because it is the West, Americanism because the United States is the leading power, and globalism because all this takes a global shape. You cannot just be friends with one against the other. That's just nothing but empty words. But unfortunately, that's what the leadership of our country does now. To my regret, we need to set up a global concept. It's not a center of power that can extinguish some fires at its boundaries or in Syria or somewhere else. But the global concept is the one that has a flame burning in its core. Not to extinguish fire at its boundaries, but to have flame in its core. But we do not have this flame burning in the core. This fire alarm switches on. Our state is an anti-global concept, the USSR. There used to be a global concept, the USSR. It was both the center of power and the global center. For certain reasons, it disappeared. But unlike Russia, that may become or may not turn into a global concept, the USSR already existed as a global concept, no matter what criticism was poured on it in books, in the mass media, in films, anywhere. The USSR will stay forever a global concept. So it's... And if you fight against this global concept, that means that you extinguish this flame, this fire that is taking place. As soon as you have just a spark, you begin to extinguish it. We say we are Russian people, then it's clear we need to protect Donbass. No, you are no nationalists. Nationalists is not good. It's not good to be a nationalist. You are patriots. Who are patriots? Those who love their country. Within which boundaries? Well, we have the boundaries of the borders of the Russian Federation. So we are patriots of the Russian Federation with its national borders. Well, then, in this case, it's clear why we do not help Donbass, because they are beyond our borders. Or what sort of patriots are we?
That's why I just was deliberating on how this fire has been set. And 3 good cases were examples. So let me just draw attention to that for 2 minutes more. There's just been Russia's Africa Summit meeting. I spent 12 years in Africa. 8 years I was fighting against colonialism, neo-colonialism, apartheid in the south of Africa. What I may tell you, the main statement, the main bullet point, the main message is that thanks to the legacy of the USSR, we have very strong positions in Africa, and we have the strongest ever positions in the countries of social origin. I was helping to that liberation movement in one of these states. But we're going to do it differently. We're not proceeding from the ideological foundation as the USSR did. So let's proceed from the profit-driven stance. My dear friends, actually, if we are strong in Africa, it was because the Soviet project was very much respected by the Africans. The Africans knew who we are, the Soviet people, and they believed that we are their friends. We are like them, and now they're telling us that, proceeding from the Soviet legacy, we will do something differently. What kind of a country we're living in? You say that we're traditionalist. Before Peter the Great, I think, our main political tradition was that a new ruler would come to power and he would like to actually do everything differently. But the very first thing he would say that everything would be just like it used to be at my father's. And step by step would remedy what actually had to be remedied. After Peter the Great, every next ruler would say, we'll do that totally differently, right? So we are doing that totally differently, and again we're speaking about Africa. Proceeding from the USSR, we will do everything differently. Another case, another example. The Russians and the Russian citizens, this difference is of dramatic importance because our local authorities and federal authorities try to tell us that Russia, that's a European nation. We're told that we are Europe. Well, if a Russian may be regarded as European, but for instance, if we look at Bashkiria or any other Oriental nation, they are far from being a European, and that's great. They are people of Oriental civilization. If you want, you may call that an Asia or whatever you want, but you have to marry that to make a unified concept. If we are Europe, then what is our national identity and nationality? Or we are an independent civilization, then why speaking about Europe? And why we are so Eurocentric? We are anti-Western as a political force, but as a world project, we are certainly being guided by the West. Whatever we do, we refer to the West, positively, negatively, but we check our steps with the West, what they think about that. Are we checking our steps with China? No, never. Ever heard in Yandex News that any Chinese leader reacted to some Russian foreign policy measure? No. Have you read about that? Or any Indian leader reacting to some Russian measures? No. But all the time we hear about Steinmeier providing certain feedback or commenting on some Russian initiatives, etc. And the last but not least, message number 3. This is something which perplexed me at all and which actually caused my sentiments going down, that the Second Cold War will not break out because we have a modern warfare. This is something which goes beyond the rational thinking. I think that the Cold War, actually, it was on prior to the World War II, and from 1917 through 1941 we outperformed the West because of the Communist Party and the International. We managed to create such a public opinion that anti-Hitler coalition was doomed to set up. Stalin outplayed the West, both in terms of diplomacy, in terms of the soft power. It was followed by a Cold War until 1991, but the main objective of the Cold War, just like any hot war objective, it was about the total destruction of the adversary. And therefore, in 1991, the Cold War was not over. We were defeated in 1991 against the backdrop of most state-of-the-art arms and warfare. So whether we win in that Cold War or we are defeated, this is a very arbitrary issue. And we still rest on the Soviet arms, and we managed to still, or we happened to lose that stage of the Cold War. So I understand that no one is dealing with developing an ideology. Well, probably this is a kind of a covert operation. Just like Sergeytsev allegedly was appointed the Minister of Defense in order to hide the preparation for a new war. But the problem is that the social and economic policy promoted by the federal authority resulted in the fact that whatever they do in the field, in the province, actually is totally rejected by the people. This is our main trouble. Therefore, once you develop any ideology, where this center of gravity should be, it should be somewhere in the outskirts. It should be somewhere in the province, like oprichniks at even the terrible times. Then Peter the Great also set up his own mock troops, realizing that otherwise he cannot win. And Stalin also rested heavily on the KGB troops, but ideology should be dominant in order to become a global project instead of the center of force. Mr. Nazarov, Oleg, dear colleagues, dear friends, the Western center of power, in order to set up a new world order, has to apply a lot of efforts, which is already being done, and one of the main measures they are taking, this is rewriting the history. They want to strike out what remains in the people's memory. Mr. Zinoviev warned that the West will not be appeased by the disintegration of the USSR, and he said that the last stage actually of the tragedy would be about the eradication of Russians in the human history at all. So the West will try to erase any footprint of the Russians in the history, as if these great people has never existed. This has already been done, this erasing, and this is being done very consistently. And the war veteran Zinoviev certainly could not see how the results of the World War II were rewritten, and fortunately he didn't see how the bronze statue to the soldier in Estonia was moved from the center of the city to the outskirts, and the opponents to that measure were stampeded by the police, and Dmitry, the Russian citizen who opposed against moving this statue, he was killed, and the perpetrators still were not identified. Then the Schetina, the Polish foreign minister, made a statement that Oswiecim, the death camp, was liberated by the Ukrainians from the First Ukrainian Front. Not the Russians, not anyone else, and no one knows what other people from that Ukrainian front were doing. Mind you, it was Mr. Konev, a Russian national, who was commander-in-chief of that army. Immediately after that, early in February 2015, an article was written which said that distorting the you should not think that these are just unknowledgeable ruffians who are distorting the history. The foreign minister actually graduated from one of the best universities, and he's a typical European moron, so to say. And later on, actually, I was asked to denounce 5 statements of my article, which, according to the claimant, was not contributed to the historical discussion. I published at Regno website my response, asking several questions to Ms. Ambassador of Poland in Russia, and she didn't respond, so again the discussion didn't take place. So what happened next? In summer 2015, I took an interview from Mr. Plotnikov. In August, it was published by Literatury Gazeta, titled Cat in Blind Alley. And this interview totally crushed and ruined the version proposed by the Polish propaganda and the Polish embassies. And out of protest to Literatury Gazeta, I signed my article with my own name, certainly. The protest actually was sent to Mr. Polikov, editor-in-chief, and it was published fully in October 2015. This protest was signed by Deputy Ambassador, and the same issue of Literatury Gazeta published a response to that letter of protest by the Poles. What I'm driving at, it should be noted that starting from 1990, every Polish diplomat who came to the Russian embassy believed that it is his or her duty to criticize a Russian report, and it lasted until 2015 for 25 years. And our main response to the Polish ambassador actually turned out to be an awakening moment, a sobering moment. They were totally unprepared for such a lashback. I warned that we have to react very stringently to the very first Soviet monuments which were destroyed at the time. Unfortunately, Russia did not resort to any reaction. Russia actually limited its reaction to some notes from the foreign ministry, and the Poles resorted to bulldozers in 2017. And I have a picture from Literatury Gazeta. Have a look at that picture. 2 bulldozers crushed a mausoleum where, in January 1945, actually was the rest place for more than 26 Red Army soldiers, and the Russian Foreign Ministry called that a barbarism, and the Poles just neglected that criticism. The Poles have destructed more than 400 monuments, so the figure is no longer a dozen or several dozens. So they destroyed several hundreds of monuments to the Soviet soldiers, and they are not complacent. And the Poles, they are setting an example to other East European nations, even those who for some time behaved quite peacefully. For instance, Czech Republic. The historian journal where I'm writing, I even had to write an article that the monument to Marshal Kornev would be moved from the downtown of Prague to appease the so-called patriots in the Czech Republic. And this is going on not only in Czech Republic due to some mood reaction of the Russian Foreign Ministry. We have to understand that you have to respond with strikes once you are stricken. And there is another book I would like to show to you. It's called Anti-Hitler Coalition. 1939, the formula of a loss or of a failure, which was published under supervision of Veronika Vershinina from the Civil Chamber of the Russian Federation, and I am an executive editor-in-chief and author of one of the articles. We are scrutinizing the pre-war history of 1939. In essence, this is the second book, or the second volume. The first was called Munich 39, Falling into the Abyss of the World War II. As proceeds from the title, Falling to the Abyss of the World War II, Munich 39, it is obvious what triggered this war. Thank you so much. Mr. Bank? Mr. Bank, anything to tell us?
I must say sorry. Today I'm late for this very, very famous forum. This is the third time attend. This is very, very exciting forum. From beginning, I want to show a gift from a very special family. This is Confucius' very expensive wood portrait, the sculpture. This portrait is made by the 73 generation of Confucius family. This artist name is Kong Qingfa. Now I read a small letter from him for a moment. Respect Oleg Zinoviev. You are the most excellent lady. Your family is the most excellent Russian family. I'm very glad through introduced by Wang Haiking, would like very much establish future cooperation with your family. Successful congratulations on your very, very interesting, very, very exciting forum in Moscow. No, in Russia. No, in the world. Thank you. During this is a very exciting forum, I want to speak something. I work as art designer, art exhibition for Russian culture in China about 11 years old until now. When I met with Kong Qingfa, Confucius family in Shandong, Qufu city, this artist from Confucius family told me, Vanya, you must do. You must do what? Establish and organize Alexander Zinoviev's painting, the architecture, culture, philosophy, book exhibition in China. When I listened to his proposal, I'm a little shy because until now, after listening to his proposal and this about 10 years experience of exhibition organized in all over China, until now, I listen to some invoice in the heaven. Maybe today is my teacher, our teacher. Alexander Zinoviev in the heaven can show us something. I remember a very famous sentence written in his book said, Russian nationality have future and potential, life of soul and spirit. In the past, although something, maybe problem, maybe troubles, maybe difficulties happened, but Russian nationality people can collect lessons, can get up, can come on. When I listen to Confucius family's artist Kong Qingfa, the proposal, I remember my teacher, our teacher, Alexander Zinoviev said the sentence. Then, during search now, I want to show a small dream. In next year, I will design a very special exhibition between our teacher, Alexander Zinoviev, and Confucius family's artist. Thank you.
Спасибо большое.
Thank you. I think that all people at our table have already spoken, except for me. Then I will take my hat of the moderator and also say a couple of words. In the first and second and our third panel discussion, we have a certain opposition flowing, or just that red line that goes through all our three panels. There were participants who sincerely said how important for us to communicate and to be friends. Families should make friends, neighbors should make friends, and countries should make friends. Well, we differ in our culture, in our languages, but we should search for common grounds, should search for understanding, and then differences will be cast away. But there were some those who opposed that, stemming from a realistic position. Well, we can forge some understanding with those who are willing, but if there are those who do not want this, just referring to our recent past, our German friend said, well, Russians and Germans, they converge, somehow they come closer to each other. Yes, we understand each other, especially after the polemics that we had back in 1941, 1945. And after the flag over the roof of Riksdag, why not make friends? Nothing stops us from this, nothing hinders this process. But when somebody gets into your house and want to rob your house, want to rape your wife and take your children away from you, well, that may seem a very strange suggestion. Let's be friends, let's overcome differences in opinion. Things are not that simple. And Vladimir Mikhailovich spoke about that as well. We need to interact somehow. But how this interaction can be launched? Lyubov Tsoy is with us. She is a famous conflict specialist on conflicts. A conflict is a very powerful construct that helps people with understanding. Actually, conflict is a very special civilizational achievement. When you manage to organize a conflict, I say one thing and you say some other thing, and we understand, we say something opposing each other, but we do not begin to strike each other into the face. Just we begin to understand what the other person means, and you begin to understand my point of view. If the conflict is well organized, is well staged, if people, the participants of the conflict, want to stay in the conflict but do not want to go beyond it, then there will be some shift in their positions. It's not just meeting midterms, but it may happen that I may change my point of view, or you may change your point of view, and in the final effect, this will bring us, if not to a complete resolution of the problem, but to some shift in it. We will turn a new page in our conflict and will continue our conversation. So my first question is, we, the humanity, we in our history, will we continue this traditional move? Fight first, and those who survive will get to the table and converse with each other. Or maybe there are some other ways out. Can we organize a conflict without a war? Because there is some value in a conflict. Why do we need conflict? Somebody said from the audience. No, conflict is a way of organizing dialogue. It's a way of organizing a dialogue where the starting points may seem irreconcilable, but actually that helps us to come to a certain reconciliation or to find some common grounds, maybe. That's one thing. Sergeytsev spoke about futurology at our second panel. It's some logia, that's a certain academic sphere about the future, not something that we invent, but something that is taking place, stemming from the reality that is around us. We can cut a certain piece that can be recognized as the future. This, what we have as a residue, is the past. But this something, for instance, the Soviet Union, the Soviet concept is our future. That's what Zinoviev called the real communism, that's our future. Let us study it. That's the essence of futurology. Let us study it, communism as a reality. But then, again, we get back to the topic of forecast. Futurology is the sphere of knowledge that studies the future that is already in our hands, is given into our hands. You may argue, you're not with me, but with Alexander Alexandrovich, Olga Mironovna. Yes, you will have a chance to contribute to the discussion. But still, what can we say about the future that is yet not in our hands, which cannot be explored yet? Many of our colleagues called the future the chaos. Maybe future is not presented yet. Maybe it's non-existent yet. Then we get into the sphere of forecasting rather than futurology. What can be said in this respect? If we think in this direction, then we need to outline or define the challenges that can measure or which can explain us what is the future, because it is something that helps us to resolve certain problems in the future. If we step over a certain challenge, then we have some new solutions in hand, or at least some idea about these new solutions. But if there is no future yet, well, maybe you have this, but I have no doubts about that. I'm speaking on my own behalf. It's my turn to speak. So I won't say anything about forecast yet, but let us pinpoint the challenges or problems against which the future can be measured or identified. Let's pinpoint this. The first challenge, to my mind, and nobody denies this, that's what Malta's raised. The the population is growing on the planet, and that's something that should be done with it. There is a way that was tested many times: genocide, war, mass destruction of people. That helps to regulate the population. But we agree that that's not something that we want. There are those who say, well, the well-being is on the rise, that's the world of consumption, people give birth to less people, then rejection of giving birth to children, that's virtually a rejection of life. It has its own price. No war, but we will not give birth to children, then we will not live. Well, actually, we're moving in this direction, robotization of human beings, and I will leave this aside for a while. Another challenge that I would outline, the challenge or problem that is everywhere, the minority, the ruling minority, well, that has always been like that. There is a small group who knows in which direction to move. They are capable of thinking, they have educations, they know where the light is. So this ruling minority is degrading. Well, they degrade. They do not know where to move, what is to be done. They do not differ from us. Another challenge: what will constrain or curb people's willfulness? Because it should be constrained, it should be curbed, it should be harnessed somehow. If that is not done, that ends up with a catastrophe. That has been done through religion. Even before Christianity, there is a myth, a model set, how things are done by gods. So this is a model for us to follow. If I do something in my life, I reproduce the way God created the universe. So that sets a certain framework. That things became even more rigid when understanding was achieved that we are not gods. God is somewhere up above, and we are to follow him. That was the beginning of the Old Testament. I'm not speaking about the religious side of that. I speak ontologically. So the Old Testament is a reflection, reflexive thought of the pagan religions, than Jesus Christ, and all that was substituted with nature. There is no God, there is nature. Nature cannot harness us. It has its own limitations of limits of resources. Only God, who was endless, could harness us. We could harness ourselves, who gives us unlimited path. We can harness ourselves, we can restrain ourselves, but the path is limitless. So what limits our willfulness? No answer to that. Three challenges, at least, with regards to which we need to think about the future.
And the last but not least, there, on the globe, the future will not materialize. So what we're going to do in Russia? Are we going to address those problems in Russia? Thank you so much. I'm passing the floor back to Olga Mironova. Thank you so much for the baton passed to me. What I may tell you, I will not object to Timothy Sergeytsev as far as I did not attend your plenary session order. I'd like to listen to his presentation and to understand the main essence of his speech, the message. Communism as a reality. Zinoviev was not speaking about the future. He just stated the facts of that age, of that epoch. Just a second. He didn't say that it is an inevitable future for the whole mankind. He said that this does exist, and somehow, whatever the developments are, the mankind will come to this fact of life, and we'll speak about discussion later on. So, ever since we were expelled from the Soviet Union, at his brightest and most outstanding lecture he delivered in Alcalá in Spain, Mr. Zinoviev said that the center of gravity of the world project, that's Moscow. He didn't mean Muscovites or just residents of Moscow. He spoke about Moscow as a spiritual, historical, and other space. He spoke about Moscow as a symbol of Russia. This was a person who was expelled from Moscow, from that very center of gravity, so he certainly had to realize what happened to him, to all of us, and instead of being succinct to blaming the country for everything which happened to him, he remained a real patriot of his country without any reference to the eastern borders, western borders. He stood up to protect his motherland. At the very first panel session, I liked the statement made by our Italian friend, Giulietta Chiesa, when he just matched with very brief nations that Russia was not in Syria and the United States was there. Then actually Russia came to Syria and the United States left, in and out, and it becomes very obvious how the balance of forces internationally looks like, and where we find some global projects or global projectors, actors, or whatever you call them, we understand what we mean. Back to Ukraine. Dmitry was very emotional and very convincing. The problem is that for my friends from Donetsk, this is not something imaginary, this is not something of your future, but this is a very dangerous and aflamed reality in which they live. We may say that Ukraine is totally anti-Russian, but I like very much the cycle of programs launched by Dmitry, which is called "If to be honest, I'm just paying tribute to you. You may praise me, well, okay. We'll do that next time." So this series of programs gives a very unbiased, very unprejudiced view or report of the events and the developments which take place at the crossroads of Russia and Ukraine. And usually Donbass is just like the pain in the back. Our German friend, Mr. Telchik, and I'm very grateful to him for accepting our invitation, for taking part in our readings. Really, he is a figure of a giant scale and giant importance. And I'm glad that he never ever used the term which causes allergy. He didn't speak annexation of Crimea. He, as a person who wrote the Russian roulette, he, with great experience, wrote about that. So he's not a theoretician sitting in front of the fireplace. He wrote what he was doing, what was his headache, what was his pain in the heart in the most difficult years when there was no annexation, but rather when West Germany and East Germany reunified. This book, were it be translated in Russian, will be of no surprise to any of the Russian-speaking audience, because it is quite naive. It outlines very mundane things, and probably we can write a more influential book. But for the propaganda brainwashed Western readers, I think such a book is a real must-have. Any German knows the text of the Constitution and should be a mandatory read for the youth, so that the youth understand what really happened, not only in Europe, not only in Germany, but on the earth in general. I'd like to get back to Mikhail, your statement about Poland. I apologize. Oleg, it was your statement. A very outstanding remark, a whole bunch of statements about hundreds of monuments to Soviet soldiers being demolished, destroyed, and ruined. There is no surprise that Ukraine is placed to the same phenomena of crushing and demolishing the monuments to Lenin, which is called Leninopad. And it is not just about demolishing the monuments to the heroes of the victory over the Nazis, but most awfully, the monuments to Lenin being demolished is being followed by creeping fascism in Europe, which lost all its opportunity to put Ukraine to the place it deserves. I understand that actually it fits very well into the scheme which could be tested in Ukraine, just like in a lab. For instance, what may happen to the country if you add some of the fascist oil to that fire. Unfortunately, Europe lost that experiment. We may mention one thing, we may mention another thing, but we have to remember all the time that history is not about some pieces of our memory. But history, this is a multifaceted, multi-layered continuous process. And once you violate or crumple certain fragment or certain component of that process, it will affect the whole global history. Back to the tristesse of our Russian petit bourgeois, who look at the West through the rosy glasses, just like the protagonists of Ilfen Petrov's novel, who came to the museum of the old furniture and would deplore how well people used to live before. I'd like to ask a question: who we are, where are we from, and where are we going to? And this topic remains crucial and relevant. And we have to rethink it, reevaluate that. We have to hold more seminars on that. Let us hold more workshops on it. We have to explain to people who we are, where we're from, and where we are moving to. And finally, ideological опричнина. That's so punitive forces. This is very interesting. Thank you so much. I don't want to be the last person to speak, so I'd like to thank all of you who came to our Zinoviev readings. I'm sure that it was very interesting and it was very diverse. We have something to share, and there is a lot we can share. And I hope that our other readings would last not 1 year, but several days instead of 1 day. And we'd like to thank hospitable international news agency Rossiya Segodnya. And actually, we had a very busy schedule. And it's like a boxing ring. And we have certain rules to follow. Still, thank you so much. Thank you for coming. See you next time.